Hello, welcome to Shine and welcome to our session called Helping Children with Spina Bifida Move Early and Why It Matters. So my name's Kathy Allen, I'm the occupational therapist here at Shine, and I recorded this just on my own, but we ran the session live with Bronwyn Warner, who is our physiotherapist. I'm hoping some of you may have met us in our capacity where we offer appointments to look at early years development checks. So yes, so I hope you enjoy the session. There will be a time for, would have been questions and answers, but at the end of this session there are details of how to contact here at Shine if you have any further questions or want any further input. So welcome to the session. So let's talk about movement and mobility and the difference between the two, because we often think that they're the same, but they're not. So movement is a change in the place or position of a part of the body or the whole of the body, and we need movement for mobility, whereas mobility is the ability to move or to be moved freely and easily in order for you to move purposefully throughout your day. So for example, in order to roll, we need to be able to use muscles. So that is movement, but mobility is the actual process of rolling, because rolling is getting yourself from A to B. And the same with, say, if you're pushing let's say a wheelchair, the movement is your arms that you use, so the muscles that you're using to move. But your actual mobility is the ability to get yourself from A to B independently. I hope that makes sense. So how do children get from one place to another? There are lots of different ways. So have a think now about how your child moves or has moved in the past. So some ways of moving include rolling, crawling, commando crawling, pivoting, bottom shuffling, getting from lying to sitting, going from sitting to lying, bear walking. That's where you might have seen little ones, they walk on their hands and feet with their bottom in the air. Cruising, so from side to side, standing, walking, maybe with or without aids, using wheeled equipment, whether that's a standing frame or sticks or wheelchair, driving in a vehicle or riding a bike, all different ways of getting from one way to another. Let's now look at what spina bifida actually is. I know many of you all know. The spina bifida essentially is where there is we have a lesion, so there's an area on the spine that doesn't form properly, and those might be what's called an open spina bifida, so that might be a myelomeningocele or a meningocele, or we sometimes have their skin covered and they're closed, or it's called a lipomyomeningocele. There is also something called spina bifida occulta, where it is a closed lesion, and that often doesn't affect mobility as much, but it can have an impact. So spina bifida, the way the muscles and your body works is that messages are sent from the brain down through the spinal cord and towards the nerves to get your body to move. You then have the sensory impact, so from touch, that information goes from your peripheral nerves through to your spinal cord and then your brain. And in spina bifida, those messages struggle to get through because of the lesion, so you don't always get the right messages through. Now, in most children with spina bifida, there will be an involvement in the sacral area. Your sacral area is quite near your bottom, and the nerves there will they control your glutes and your buttocks, so the really big muscles that allow you to help to sit, to kneel and to stand. And so that can be why it can be a little bit more difficult. And you often also get it can affect your calf muscles, again in your lower legs. So many of our children may struggle to just completely stand without anything, so they may need, it might just need something simple like quite a supportive shoe, but they may need something a bit bigger like an orthotic or even slightly larger orthosis in order to stand. Or just to say as well that the sacral nerves also control your bladder and bowels, and I know we're not talking about that here, but again we know that bladder and bowels are affected by spina bifida. So why is early mobility so important? Well, it helps our bodies grow, so it's really important because when you're babies, you arrive and you need those muscles. You're pretty floppy. You need to actually be moving your body around in order to grow your muscles, to strengthen your bones, ready to get to standing and moving. It also helps our minds to develop. So not only does moving help your physical development, it helps your cognitive, so your memory, your intelligence. It helps your emotional and your social skills to develop as you move and explore your environment. The more you move, the more you realise there is something to see. And also develops building confidence. As your baby, as your little one maybe rolls to go and find a toy and grab a toy or something it shouldn't have, maybe your mobile phone, that sense of achievement helps to then reinforce why moving is important. So there are many physical benefits of early mobility. So as we said, it helps to build muscle strength, and we need to strengthen those muscles. So in spina bifida, sometimes there are going to be muscles that aren't working as well as we want them to. The nerves might not be firing fully. So as we can, we're going to build that muscle strength, and it might be that some of the other muscles are going to have to take over. So that's very important. Helps with healthier bones. Bones become healthy by weight bearing. That is the best way to get good healthy bones, and we know that sometimes as people get older with spina bifida that bone health can be a bit of a problem. We know that in general populations we see older people, we talk about something called osteoporosis, and we talk about the importance of doing exercise, especially weight bearing exercise. So that's one of the reasons why we want to get in there early. It also reduces the risk of further issues like pressure sores or stiff joints. Again, we know that as people get older, sometimes with spina bifida, that can be something that is a problem because of the imbalance in muscles and the lack of sensation. So yeah, so just another reason why getting moving is important. It also boosts brain power. So so actually we talk about it can help your brain to grow. When they move, they're learning problem solving skills, and they're helping with their attention. It helps with your what's called your visual perceptual skills. So the way your eyes see things, you see things differently if you're lying down to if you're sitting up, and your visual perceptual skills are something you're going to need in life. So for example, if you're climbing the stairs, it's your brain's ability to judge the depth and the distance, and that sometimes can be affected in children with spina bifida. But being able to move around means that they see things in different planes, and we can work on that. Learning through exploration, we know that it's exciting to learn, and the more you move, the more you learn and you explore the world around you. And if anyone's ever met we know that young babies, children, toddlers wake up and they're excited by their world and excited to explore, and so we want that for children as well. We know it improves communication, so once children are able to maybe sit up and move around, they're much more keen to then start communicating with you and asking for things, listening, and their language skills come on. There are also social and emotional benefits to moving. So one of the things we often say as therapists is we want a child who has any kind of extra need to try and experience the same things as their peers at a similar developmental stage. So we want them to develop alongside their peers. We want independence. One of the core reasons behind physiotherapy and occupational therapy is to allow people to become as independent as possible in their life and to have as many opportunities to explore and their environment and things. So, including making friends and socializing, and it reduces less isolation if you can if you can mobilize independently, whatever way you get around. If you can mobilize independently, it allows you to explore the world, to, as I said, to meet people, and leads to far less isolation. So, ways to help your child with mobility. So there are lots of different ways. So we've got, the first thing is play, explore, have fun. You know, you are parents, your kids love to have fun. That is how physiotherapists and occupational therapists with children, we like to explore fun ways to let your child move, because no child wants to just sort of no adult wants to just do a whole bunch of exercises. But if you can incorporate exercise into play, then that is great. And your physiotherapist in particular, they're like movement coaches, so they can look at what's going on with the different muscles, what needs working on, what doesn't, and then they can look at what type of exercises we want to practice. And then we look alongside that with OTs, the best way to try and incorporate that into everyday life. And as I said, to mainly make it fun, because we want your child to be getting stronger and improve their abilities. One of the best ways to do it is to be out, go and join if you can, play groups and activities within the community. People are very accepting, and I think sometimes if you have a child that's perhaps slightly different, or you feel is slightly different, sometimes there can be a nervousness, but actually your child is generally very robust, and you know, throw them in, they will learn from other children, and other children won't see any difference. They're all going to be sort of probably crawling around and getting messy and putting things in their mouth. So go and explore community groups. Sometimes you'll ask your physiotherapist, there are sometimes more specialist groups out there, but also just go to your church halls, go to the whatever groups are available and try them out. And then alongside that, you have physiotherapy and occupational therapy, and as we said, they often work alongside one another. They want to look at child development, and you should be able to access those through the NHS. And within occupational therapy and physiotherapy, it may be that your child needs a little bit of equipment to help with mobility. As I said before, it might just be something as simple as a pair of supportive boots from the orthotist that might just provide the ankle stability to allow them to explore their environment. But they might need slightly more equipment or different equipment, and it may be that they need that equipment for a season in order to get them on their feet, or it may be that that's a long-term thing. So one of the things we've talked about is orthotics. You may not have heard of orthotics, and you might know about them, but sometimes it's basically providing some support, normally to the ankle, sometimes to the knee, and it can support the joints where the muscles might be a bit weaker and prevents tripping. So essentially it's almost like providing a bit of scaffolding. So if you can see the so there's a picture of somebody standing. That's a type of splint we don't often get on the NHS, but it provides some ankle stability and sort of knee stability as well. But so the one on the top left is called an AFO, an ankle foot orthosis. That one looks like it's probably a night splint designed to stretch, but you can have them often, and you put them into shoes, and it just provides, as I said, it provides almost like that external structure to provide some support to the muscles to allow them to move. And the bottom one is sort of like some boots, and again, some of your children, not all of them, they may have been in something called boots and bars initially, if they've had something called talipes where the feet are turned in or turned up. So So that's why we have orthotics, and we know that it supports the foot position because we know that being upright and weight bearing is good for a lot of things. So for social inclusion, but for bladder and bowel health, but also for bone strength. Moving on, we've got something called multimodal mobility. Apologies for the terminology. And I am going to apologise for the picture. Please ignore it a little bit. It's an example of different equipment, but it's not necessarily the example we would have chosen. So essentially, multimodal mobility means using different ways to get around. You know, we all use different ways to get around. If we're going to the local shop, we might just walk there, but if we need to go to the supermarket, we would use a car. So similarly with your child, in their home environment, it might be that crawling or rolling or commander crawling is how your child gets around, and it is their safe, independent way to move. But that may not work, or it probably won't work if you're wanting to go outside and trying to get to school, or in a preschool environment or a school environment, in which case they may have they may use a little powered chair or a small wheeled chair, because that allows them the independence to move around. We will look at some examples of some videos a bit later. Also, as we talked about, the importance of standing for bone density, for a lot of things for inclusion. So getting your child up on the feet is something that a physio is going to be keen to try and do if possible. So it might be that you have something called a standing frame. You can get those with wheels. It might be that they just need actually just some splints and maybe some crutches or a walking frame. But the point is, one size doesn't fit all. And often, and I've mentioned at this point, I've mentioned wheelchairs, and I've mentioned that purposefully because sometimes we find that with a physiotherapist is can be very keen on walking, and they feel like if you give a child a wheelchair, they're going to become lazy, they're not going to walk. We would really argue that there is no case for that. The evidence does not support that. We would encourage our little ones, as we said, we really want our peers to experience the same things. We want our children, rather, not the peers, to experience the same thing as their peers at a similar time. And so your children's peers are going to be, most of them by the age of 2, will be independently mobile, as in they will be able to walk and explore their environment. Now we want your child to be able to explore their environment independently as well. And if walking is difficult, then it is helpful to introduce another form of mobility. Now, it may be that crawling is still fine, certainly in the house, but we find that some children, if you put them in a little chair, as long as it's suitable for them, and we'll talk about that later, they just go straight on, and they are their independence, and we watch them and they run away from you and they get to explore their environment. And what we actually see is they're motivated, so they're then much more motivated to do walking with a standing frame or with with the physiotherapy. So don't be scared if we mention wheelchairs early on. It doesn't mean that we are saying they're not going to walk. We're saying it's part of this multimodal, this multiple way of getting around. I sometimes say, we do not own just one pair of shoes. We wouldn't wear our slippers to go and climb a mountain, and we wouldn't wear walking shoes to go out partying. So it's the same. Your child is potentially going to have a range of equipment. It may be that it gets a bit busy at home with equipment, but that might just be how it works to give them the greatest independence. Here we have some examples of wheeled mobility aids that can be used for our really quite little ones. So the slide on the left, there is something called, the little one is in something called a zip sack. There is also something called a scoot, which is very similar, and it just allows them the freedom to move around and explore their environment, which is what we want. The next slide in, we've got a little one who's going very fast in. It's a little Panthera micro. Now, they may well have got this from a charity called WizKids, who are a great national charity, and they recognise the importance of independent mobility, but also the difficulties we have sometimes with accessing these chairs on the NHS for little ones. So they offer free loans up to the age of 5. The next slide along is a different type of mobility aid. It's actually a standing frame, which is something some of your children may use or have used, and it allows you to stand for bone density, for lots of social interactions at a good level, but also this is called a rabbit stander, and it has wheels, so it also allows that freedom again to move. And then the final slide is a form of powered mobility. Now this is called a WYSIBUG. WYSIBUGs are great. They're from a charity called Designability. They're completely free to use, and they will take little ones from the age of about 14 months. And the only thing at the moment they really have to have is some head control. So again, different forms of things. There are also, your child might also have different types of walking frames, etc. But I just thought it's a good chance to see an example of some of the things that are out there. Children with spina bifida may use different muscles to walk than typical children. So the calf muscles role in walking is to pull up the heel, which pushes the weight onto the front of the foot, driving you forward. However, when the nerves of the calf muscle are affected, children might walk using their hip muscles, and they pull the whole leg up side to side. Now this can work, but it can be tiring and can be uncomfortable. There may also sometimes be visual perceptual skills that are difficult, or motor planning issues, which can make it a bit harder to get around. So your walking ability and style might change as your child gets older, and their abilities might change. They might get heavier. Ideally, excess weight gain should be avoided if at all possible. So if you can, keep the child as mobile as you can. One of the things, as we mentioned, wheelchairs. So as I said, I do suggest that a wheelchair referral can go in from as early as 2, if appropriate. Obviously, not all children with spina bifida are going to need to use a wheelchair, but if mobility, independent mobility, is difficult, so if actually they're using, say for example, they're using a walking frame and splints and shoes, and so they have some mobility, but actually they're finding that very tiring, or they're not able to keep up with their peers, that might be a time when you say, look, actually I think it might be beneficial to have a wheelchair to use part of the time, as we previously said, as part of this multimodal way of getting round. When you get a wheelchair, there should be wheelchair training, and there are charities that can offer that. A wheelchair should really be as lightweight and fit as well as possible. So kids, if you're using it, when little ones are struggling with their leg muscles, they are going to rely much more heavily on their arms and their shoulders. Now, your shoulder joints are amazing. They're really mobile, and they do great things. They allow you to use your hands really well, but what they're not are legs. So your hip joints and your leg joints, typically, I'll do a picture. So this is like kind of the ball of your leg, your femur, and then the socket, and it's a very solid joint. It allows you to move, but it's quite a firm joint surrounded by lots of muscles. Now your shoulders, again, lots of mobility, but it's a much shallower sort of socket joint, and so it's much more easily damaged. So we want to make sure that we limit that as much as possible. So getting some training, if you get a wheelchair, making sure it fits well. So it shouldn't be too wide. So the wheels, it should fit quite snugly. This is all kind of things that hopefully your wheelchair service and the therapist there should should be looking at. When you do, if your child has been using a wheelchair for sport, or if they are using a wheelchair, again, at the end of the day, it might be useful to do some stretches. So for example, short arm stretches across, encourage them to do that. A bit like if you're somebody who goes to the gym, and do just for a few seconds and holding it there and moving this way as well. So you can it just stretches all those arms, because if you are using a walking frame, if your child's using a walking frame or stander, or using their arms all the time, it's important to just stretch and make sure that those joints don't get stiff. So what is our role as parents, or rather what is your role as a parent? And first and foremost, I will say, it is to be a parent, and you are allowed to be a parent, and they are your child or your children. And I think sometimes you are expected to be a therapist, you're expected to be the nurse. You often wear lots of different hats when you have a child that perhaps has some extra things going on. So your role is to cheerlead and to encourage. So with early mobility, your role very much is, encourage your child to move in any which way, create opportunities for mobility and movement. So, getting them out on the floor, getting them, if they're young, tummy time. I know if you've seen Bronwyn or myself, we often push it, but it is really important, and it is just great for getting them. We know a lot of them don't like it, so make it fun. Involve yourself, involve any other kids, dogs, whatever, and try it in different positions. But yeah, just create those opportunities for movement. So anywhere you are, so if you're on a changing mat, maybe, which, get them to roll over, get them to grab their legs, and sort of encourage them to explore. Partner with therapists. Hopefully you will have access to at least physiotherapy and maybe occupational therapy. You may not see them as often as you would like. We know that the NHS struggles. We know that there's not always the service and the levels that we would like and you would like, but use your therapist. So make sure they understand the home situation, and try and get a program for home that means that you can incorporate into your life, because being a parent of just a typical child is hard enough. So but use your therapist, partner with them. Also, there are some, as we've heard, we saw some videos, there are some amazing charities out there. Engage with charities, engage with, if it's appropriate, wheelchair services. If your child, what I haven't said is, if your child perhaps is has maybe a slightly higher level lesion, and actually sitting, so they're getting to an age where, like 9 months, a year, and actually sitting is still difficult and they haven't quite got the control, then you should get your occupational therapy, normally maybe physiotherapy. They should be able to provide some kind of seating at home, which allows your child to just be supported, so then they can carry on doing using their hands and doing all the other activities. But similarly, if your child has outgrown your buggy, or the buggy that you have is not supportive enough, again, you might get a referral to wheelchair services, and they can look at specialist buggies. Now, I will talk to you, some wheelchair services, and we do not agree with this, but some wheelchair services will not provide chairs for under 3s, occasionally for under 5s, which we don't think is acceptable. But you need to go in there and be empowered. Talk to us here at Shine. There are also other charities out there. As I mentioned before, WizKids is a national charity, and it does free wheelchair loans now for under 5s, because it recognises that there is a gap. Children should be allowed to explore their environment at the same time as their peers, but there's this gap. So do apply to wheelchair services if appropriate, because it's important that the NHS knows that there are children out there that need the services. But at the same time, there are other services and charities out there that might be able to help. So challenges you and your child might face. It can feel tough when your child has physical limitations and can't move like other kids, but do remember every child's journey is unique, and you know there are resources out there to help you. Shine is here to help you, the therapists are here to help you. So you know, be kind to yourself, look after your own emotions as well. It is tough it's tough to be a parent, so, and it's tougher when you've got a child that's got extra things, but get out there and meet other parents if you can, you know, get that support. Some other challenges you might find, sometimes some children unfortunately do feel pain. This isn't really common in children with spina bifida, but where there is some pain, you know, get support, get help, because it might just be that they need a little bit of extra physiotherapy, or we need to understand why they're in pain. It can feel a challenge sometimes when getting conflicting information. I've already mentioned sometimes, certainly when it comes to mobility, there can be a reluctance to provide, say, a wheelchair, or reluctance if you say, I want to your therapist, I want to get this little electric wheelchair, this whizzy bug. They think that that child's not going to then be motivated, but as I've previously said, that is just not what we see. If you have any concerns, you know, we do have professional membership. You can always encourage your physio or your OT to get in contact with us, and we can talk them through clinical reasoning why we are suggesting something like this, because it does sometimes feel counterintuitive to do that. Other challenges we can find is sometimes a child's internal motivation and self-direction. Now, sometimes we find that we often ring up, when with myself, we ring up families and they say, oh yes, our child's, the baby, she's very content, or he's very content, he just sits and watches. Now, that may well just be the child's personality. There are sitters and watchers in the world, and there's doers and movers. But we also know that some children with spina bifida, the way the brains develop means that actually they can struggle with that self-initiation. So you might want to, sometimes therapists and people just say, oh, they'll develop in their own time, just sit back and wait and they'll learn to move. Bronwyn and I would often say, actually don't do that, because actually sometimes some of these children actually just need to be shown what to do. So they might need to be shown how to roll, and by physically moving your hands and putting them on and that kind of thing. If you want extra support advice in that, again, you can get in contact with us here at Shine and we can talk you through that kind of thing. One last area that we sometimes find children struggle with is sensory processing difficulties. Again, we know that's a whole topic in itself, and I can't really cover all of that, but that is just how our bodies interpret the world around us and the information coming in. So some children with spina bifida might struggle with that. So we know that they may have altered sensation in their feet. Some children don't like, if you try and stand them up, they might try and avoid putting their feet down and putting weight down through their legs, even though they've got some quite good movement in their feet. And you might wonder why that is. And sometimes it can be because they're just avoiding, they don't like the feeling, the touch, or they don't understand it. So there are ways you can help with that. So for example, things like doing deep pressure and sort of exposing your child to that kind of thing. Again, it's a whole area. We have got videos, we've got information, we've got our different books, so come back to us on that. But just to be aware that sometimes your child can process things a little bit differently to their peers. So how do we look at overcoming some of these challenges? Well, again, with mobility, we've said, you know, start early. It's never too early to start with your baby and your little one. Little and often, you know, we often talk about tummy time and people say, well, they hate it. And so rather than try to do it once or twice a day for a long period of time with a miserable baby or miserable child, you know, doing it in short little bursts and trying to fit it in. Now, when babies and children are young, they are really what's called, their brains are really plastic. We talk about neuroplasticity, which is the brain's ability to make new connections. And the more you do a movement, the more you do something, the stronger that connection becomes. Now, we don't lose that skill later in life, but it diminishes quite a lot. But in children and babies, it's really good. So that's why we encourage you to get in there early. But do try and fit it into everyday life. No one wants to do, so don't always have time to just do a physio session or an occupational therapy session or whatever. You can incorporate it into life. Make use of the tools and the equipment that is available. These have been designed to try and help your child. They're not there to hinder, they're there to try and help with independence. So if you're prescribed orthotics, wear those. Try using the standing frames. We haven't covered, and Bronwyn, our physio, covered this in the session, but we have something called spinal stimulation, which is something that we are using. We're currently doing a research project into this, where we can use essentially electrical impulses, a little bit like a TENS machine, and the hope is that it can help fire up the muscles, and we have seen changes with that. So if that's something you're interested in, please do contact us and Bronwyn can get back to you on that. And then finally, get support. I'm biased, but Shine is a great way to start, because we get that spina bifida is complicated. We get that it's not an easy journey sometimes, and we're here to listen and to offer advice, but there are also other great charities and organisations out there. So hopefully we're going to wrap up this presentation, and I hope that you now understand a little bit more about why early mobility and movement matter. So the next steps are, just if you want to re-listen to this, if you want to contact, as I said, myself and Bronwyn are always free and available, and we do have some slots available to have a call or even a video call with yourself and your child. Just the idea is that we can support the services you already have, and I just hope that we've encouraged you. Now, if you have listened to anything on this talk and actually you think this is quite worrying, or this isn't something you expected, again, please don't go away and worry about that. Get in contact with us. Not all the information here is going to be relevant to your child, because children with spina bifida, like all children, vary hugely. So thank you for listening. Now, obviously, we did have last time, obviously we had live questions and answers. I'm pre-recording this, so we don't have any outside questions, but I did want to just mention that one of the questions we had related to carrying a child, and I just wanted to highlight as well, just looking after yourself as a parent. So if your child is going to be walking slightly later, or if indeed they're perhaps not walking, the odds are you're going to be carrying them and lifting them more than you would typically. So just, if you've never thought about it, think about the general principles of moving and handling. I'm sure you've probably had some training in the past at work, etc. But just think about how you move yourself, because we want to protect you and keep you safe. Little bits of equipment, there's a couple of bits of equipment that are helpful. I found something called a hippie chick, and there are other forms of these around, which is just a device. So it's basically, I don't know how to explain it, it goes around your waist, around your hips, and it provides essentially a platform for you to put your child on, your baby on. So normally you'd perhaps throw your hip out and carry your baby on your hip. Now, not only is that not great for your hip, also many of our children don't have the strength to then grip with their own legs. So something like that can be helpful, or slings or baby carriers can just be helpful. Again, talk to your therapist, talk to us. Yeah. So thank you so much for listening. As I said, if you've got any questions, we've got our website, we've got our first contact details on here, and I hope this has been a helpful session. Thank you. Bye bye.